good to go.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the final defense of doctoral student Brian Opalo. The title of his dissertation is Urban School Psychologists and School Social Workers' Perceptions of School Resource Officers. Today's dissertation defense is presented in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of the Doctor of Philosophy in Curriculum and Instruction at Concordia University. So I'd just like to take a quick moment to introduce, hold on, why does it say here? Yeah, to introduce Brian's dissertation committee. I'm Denise Glasgow, and we have Dr. Mary Crabtree as the methodologist and Dr. Kathy Bonner as the reader. And I would just like to take a brief moment to introduce our doctoral candidate, Brian Opalo. Brian is a school psychologist currently employed by the Chicago Public Schools. He received his bachelor's degree in psychology from Chicago State and a specialist degree in school psychology from Illinois State University. He went back to school and earned a master's degree in school leadership from Concordia University and is now finishing up his doctoral degree in curriculum and instruction. He actively participates in the Professional State Association as well as church. So before we begin, Brian, I'm not sure if Paula went over this. Are you expecting any guests today?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Are they're with us, Paul?
I would have to assume so at this point. There's
Okay, good. Okay, then we are ready to go.
9 people in the room that aren't us.
Okay, perfect. I guess I didn't click down there. So we will begin with Brian presenting his PowerPoint.
Thank you so much, professors, and thank you everyone for attending my dissertation defense. And yes, the title of my dissertation is Urban School Psychologists and School Social Worker Perceptions of School Resource Officers. This topic became an interest of mine, being a school-based mental health staff and child advocate, as I just don't want any of my students being led to incarceration, especially when it's not warranted. As we continue on with this presentation, you'll learn more about what this means.
Real quick, did Brian get really soft for anyone, or is that just me? Okay.
He did.
Hold on. I'm
Perfect.
All right, and so thank you everyone, and full speed ahead. So the title of my dissertation is Urban School Psychologists and School Social Workers' Perceptions of School Resource Officers. And so this presentation is organized by the chapters of my dissertation. The first chapter is a brief review of the background information. Chapter 2 goes into an overview of the literature. And I will also introduce a theoretical framework of the study, which lies at the foundation of this study. Chapter 3 will be the research questions as well as the methodology. Chapter 4 is data analysis and results. Chapter 5 is the discussion of the research questions and the general conclusion of the study. The issues of the study that will be addressed, or the problem statement, was based on research on school resource officers, or SROs. As I continue this presentation, I'll be using SROs and school resource officers interchangeably. And the problem statement is kind of connected to the school to prison pipeline. That will be discussed a little bit more in the theoretical framework section, but a quick introduction of this is the school to prison pipeline is a system based on policies, perceptions, and practices that target students and lead them towards incarcerations. SROs were noted as being part of this system, and beginning in the summer of 2020, SROs were being removed from schools from all across the nation. Educational stakeholders such as teachers, principals, and politicians all shared their views in this, except for school-based mental health staff. Somehow this group was excluded from the discussion, as they also work with SROs. And so the purpose of this qualitative study was to examine the perceptions of school psychologists, school social workers on school resource officers assigned to urban high schools. This study also investigated how school psychologists and school social workers perceive SROs in the school community. Our intention was to use the findings of this study not only to contribute to the larger knowledge base of information on this topic, but also to be used for policy change as school districts are determining the need of having SROs in their buildings. As an overview, the review of literature began with the history of SROs, which goes far back as the early 1930s, and shared the definition of them being police officers that are assigned to schools. A number of studies shared the original goals of districts having SROs were to prevent criminal activities in schools. In the early 1990s, SROs was pushed heavily in schools in order to prevent mass school shootings, such as what happened in Columbine High School and Sandy Hook Elementary. In time, SROs were used to deter gang activity, drug abuse in children, and teach criminal prevention programs. The literature review also visited the impact of SROs in the school community. In their relationship to school communities, their efforts of maintaining order were being contributed to the school to prison pipeline. Some of the examples shared was an incident that caught national attention in Chicago, where a female African-American student, a special needs student, was assaulted, and she was tased by two SROs when she just refused to go to the in-school suspension room. In another situation, a female African-American student received a concussion by a SRO. Her only crime was that she was in a heated argument against a group of girls. In both situations, the incident was recorded, shared on social media, and eventually shared across mainstream media. But not all violent acts or misconducts caused by SROs are recorded or even discussed. The literature review also discussed the perceptions of educational groups on SROs. Research involving school administrators tend to reveal that they view SROs as valuable members of the school community. In schools, SROs are seen as the enforcers of school administrators, and school administrators rarely question the actions of SROs. Teachers and supporting staff also have positive views towards SROs, as they tend to contact them when they're having difficulty with students. In a number of perception studies, teachers tend to believe the presence of SROs deter criminal activities such as school shootings and drug dealings. Students tend to have mixed feelings of SROs. Students with negative interactions with police tend to have negative perceptions of SROs. It was noteworthy to share across studies. Most children do see SROs as those that help make schools safer for the greater student bodies. However, a number of studies have also shown students of color and students with disabilities don't feel they are part of that student body. Across studies, editorials, and news articles, community educational stakeholders such as teachers' unions and educational experts tend to have the most negative views of SROs. Those that are well-versed in the school to prison pipeline also see SROs as the enforcers of the school to prison pipeline. They connect SROs with community police and believe they have the potential to use deadly force in enforcing school laws, just as how community police were televised using deadly force, especially when the need of that force is unnecessary. Interesting enough, there is a gap in literature about the views of school-based mental health staff. This study is aimed to address this gap in literature and give this group a voice, especially since school-based mental health staff serve a plethora of duties in school, all with a focus of improving school culture and helping students in need. And so the foundation of the study, or the theoretical framework, is based on two theories: the sense of community theory by Macmillan and the school to prison pipeline, which is coined by Wald and Lawson. The sense of community theory is a theory that defines a well-functioning community. This theory explains how members can function in the organization, keeps members in that organization, and how individuals can lose their membership. Rooted in community psychology, the sense of community theory is based on four elements: spirit, trust, trade, and art. Those elements kind of link together like a ladder, where the lowest levels must be met for the higher ones to be achieved. Hold on, sorry. I'm sorry about that. The spirit of community, or spirit, is the emotional bond of members that has to achieve membership. This is the foundation community where all members have to have a connection with each other. No one shares this. Testing.
You're good.
Okay.
You're good. I'll jump back in if there's a problem.
Okay, no problem. I'm sorry about that. And so the third element is trade, where the benefits are shared and the membership kind of reinforces each other. And the last element is art, where the membership works together to create work samples. And in most research, schools have been known as communities. Some may have stronger elements, but they all tend to have all those elements. And the next theory is the school to prison pipeline, where teachers and school administrators are kind of known to use implicit biases and zero tolerance policies on the student body. School resource officers tend to be the reinforcers of this, and students of colors, as well as students with disabilities, tend to be the most impacted by this. And so in addressing the gap in literature, the three research questions are: what are the perceptions of school psychologists and school social workers on school resource officers assigned to their schools? Second research question is: do school psychologists and school social workers believe that SROs contribute to the school to prison pipeline? This is key because if they don't believe that they contribute to the pipeline, they may be actors and might be contributors to it as well. And do school psychologists and school social workers foresee any changes in the school community with removal of SROs? And so in this study, we decided to go with a qualitative research format recommended by Plano, Clark, and Cresswell, which is the best used to answer those research questions. In the study, we have used a purposeful sampling. Chicago was used as the district of choice, and Chicagoland school psychologists and school social workers were selected as participants. It was recommended for 6 school psychologists, 6 school social workers, with the emphasis on maximum variability. And here is a list of the participants for the studies. All the participants were coded by their occupation as well as the selection of interviews. So like the first person that was interviewed is S1, and the third psychologist is P3. And no other demographic information was used in the study. The data collection tools were screener surveys, online interviews, and reflective journaling. The screener surveys were used in order to get the background information, as well as just to see have they really worked with the school resource officer in their buildings. So this is used just as a confirmation to see if they even qualify to be part of the study. And the interview questions were used to address the research questions. There were 11 questions. The first 2 were confirmations of the screener. The last interview question was open-ended, just to kind of ask anyone, is there anything else you would like to add? And so I'll give everyone just a chance to kind of glance through the research questions. Okay. And then I also use reflective journaling. Through the interview, I took notes as well as notes for the data collection and data analysis. The journaling was uploaded with the rest of the files, and the hard copies were disposed of. And so as the data collection procedures, step 1, I had to have IRB approval. And once I received that, then there was an invitation to participate in the doctoral research study program form that was sent across online professional sites for candidates. Those that was interested, I gave them a consent form and a screener form. And those that were selected to participate was given an opportunity to be a part of a Zoom online interview. And so after the interviews, well, during the interview, it was done on Zoom, and Zoom recorded all of the interviews as transcripts. So after the recordings, Then I had a chance to create partial transcripts, which was pretty much to get rid of filler statements, get rid of run-on statements, and to kind of polish them up. After that, I sent them straight to participants to let them see the partial transcripts to see if they agree with the revisions and to see if there's anything else that need to be added. That is also called member checking. Once I got the thumbs up from the participants, then we went right to the data coding, where at first we looked through each individual's, the actual transcripts were coded, abbreviated, and were pretty much turned to data. First was done by individuals to kind of see if there's any patterns by individuals, and then by groups, school psychologists, as well as school social workers, just to see if there's any patterns within the groups. And then we kind of looked at everyone together. After that, we kind of looked through themes, which was axial coding, and the analysis of the themes. Here we go. The major themes that was based on the perceptions were pretty much 5. One was that school psychologists and school social workers see school resource officers as school disciplinarians. They also see them as those that arrest students. They impact school climate. They're used for crime prevention and should be reserved for dangerous situations. These are the 5 major themes that were found through the data analysis. The first theme of SROs as school disciplinarians, that does conflict with the literature, and it also conflicts with best practice by research, as SROs are not trained to be school disciplinarians. This isn't even an expectation for SROs. However, they are seen in this role. Some of the participants were found to be in favor of SROs as disciplinarians, and some were not. This is just a few of the rationales shared by participants that support their feelings. And as you can see, their perceptions vary and were very much polarized. So I'll give everyone just a chance to kind of glance through some of their feelings. Okay. And the second theme of SROs is that they arrest students. Interesting enough, and I was not ready for this one as well, some of the participants are in favor of SROs making student arrests, and just a few were not. Although there were polarizing views on this practice, all participants were aware that this is a duty of SROs. Listed is just a few of the rationale shared by participants on this theme. And I'll give everyone just a chance to kind of glance through their responses. Okay. And the third theme discovered were that SROs impact school climate. School climate can be seen as the atmosphere of learning and positive well-being. The polarizing views were also seen in this, where some participants feel that SROs positively impact school climate. Some believe they negatively impact school climate. The trend of responses was based on how people felt at schools. As you kind of see from the rationales, the safer participants feel, the most likely they perceive SROs as positively impacting school climate. Negative perceptions appear to be the results where participants don't see SROs as helping others feel safe. Okay. And the fourth theme were that SROs are used for crime prevention. All participants are aware SROs are police officers. However, they do differ on whether they feel SROs should be in a school building on a regular basis in order to prevent crime. Some participants feel they are needed in order to prevent crime and some don't. And those that are not in favor tend to believe that their presence put students in dis-ease, almost in distress. So I'll give everyone just a chance to kind of glance through some of the examples of how some of the participants feel about this topic. And as you see, their views are very polarized. The last theme is that school psychologists and school social workers believe SROs should be reserved for dangerous situations. This does align with the theme of crime prevention that we just had. However, some participants feel they should remain in school to deter dangerous situations from happening. Some feel SROs should be part of the daily operations of schools, as they should be easily available to support schools in these bad situations. Those that oppose believe they should not be in school for daily operations, as that is not the norm. I'll give everyone just a chance to kind of glance through some of the examples. Okay. And so this is chapter 5, which is the discussion section of the dissertation. Now that we kind of covered the themes, we'll now go into the research questions. And the first one is, what are the perceptions of urban school psychologists and school social workers of school resource officers assigned to their schools? We will look at the analysis between groups and across groups. And this finding was interesting, and I was really not expecting this, as there were no true consensus between school psychologists. Within the group of school psychologists, their views were polarized, where some were in favor, some were not in favor, and it did not deviate across questions. The same was also found with school social workers, where there was no true consensus between social workers. They were also polarized, where some were in favor and some were not in favor. And here are just a few examples of the polarizing views of school psychologists and school social workers, where the P's are the psychologists and the S are social workers. But you kind of see that there is no in between with them. And so with the polarizing views in itself, pretty much created two new groups: the pro-SROs and anti-SROs. The school psychologists and school social workers, they all pretty much share similar views, to the point where these two groups really personify really what's going on. The pro-SROs were those that are in favor of SROs in schools, and the anti-SROs are those that are not. And so with this, kind of created a whole new group where we kind of look at the participants. And as we look at this, patterns definitely emerged. Where African Americans that identify themselves as male tend to be anti-SROs. Whites that identify themselves as male tend to be split between pro-SROs and anti-SROs. In fact, in this study, it was straight down the middle. And those that identify themselves as female tend to be pro-SROs. And this was across cultures. And so this slide goes into the major themes, and then look at the perception of pro-SROs and anti-SROs. And we kind of see across themes, pro-SROs supports school resource officers as disciplinarians. They're okay with SROs arresting students, as they believe this is supporting school rules. They feel SROs are peacemakers and they improve school climate. They prevent crime in schools and should be used not just in emergency situations, but in daily operations. Across themes, anti-SROs are not in favor of school resource officers, as they believe that they should not be disciplinarians. Student arrests should be done as a last resort, should not be visible in school as their presence negatively impacts school climate. See disciplinary issues as criminal behavior, and should only be called upon for dangerous situations. This opens the door to the second research question. Do school psychologists and school social workers contribute to the school to prison pipeline? Say it again. Do school psychologists and school social workers believe school resource officers contribute to the school to prison pipeline? As we kind of see the views of school social workers, psychologists are identical, where 5 school social workers is like, yes, they do contribute, and 1 didn't. And the same was also seen with school psychologists, which 5 believe they do, and 1 didn't. Interesting enough, all of them did admit that school resource officers arrest students. And that finding does align with the themes that was developed through the data analysis. The literature, as well as the theoretical framework, also made the connections that SROs is a contributor to the school to prison pipeline because they arrest students. So even though the 2 says no, but from them saying, yes, they do arrest students, that does kind of align like, yes, in a way, they do contribute. The last research question, do school psychologists and school social workers foresee any changes in the school community with the removal of school resource officers from high schools? And so with the discussion, we kind of see with pro SROs and anti SROs, they all do say that if SROs removed from schools, they'll decrease student arrests. This kind of helps out with, and kind of confirms the previous research question of saying that, yes, they do contribute to the school to prison pipeline. But pro SROs, they also share that if school resource officers are not in buildings, negative behavior will increase. There'll be a void in the school disciplinarian role, and the peacemaker role, there'll be a vacancy. Whereas the anti-SROs, they kind of feel that school administrators will be forced to be disciplinarians. The general student body will be at ease, and that the role of school security would not be confused with SROs. And so we definitely see that there is definitely some different views of the removal of school resource officers. So in summary, school psychologists and school social workers have polarizing views of school resource officers. And one side of the scale are pro SROs and the others are anti SROs. Pro SRO sees the need of school resource officers based on student discipline and fear of student safety. This fear of student safety, interesting enough, is not due to school shootings, it's not due to gang violence, it has nothing to do with drug abuse. This fear is based on the possible deterioration of the school climate. Although school psychologists and school social workers are knowledgeable of the school to prison pipeline and how SROs contribute to it, pro SROs are okay with this as long as the positive climate is upheld. Pro SROs believe school resource officers have the same right of being in the school building as teachers and school administrators. So for pro SROs, school resource officers should be seen in the hallways, could be seen in classrooms and in any part of the schools. On the other side of the scale, anti-SROs tend to view that all students are part of the school community. They were reluctant to have a student arrested unless an emergency. Anti-SROs are against the school to prison pipeline and believe SROs should be removed in order to stop the pipeline. So in a way, anti-SROs views of school resource officers appear to be similar to community educational groups. And so the implications of further research, I do believe that there is definitely areas that could be further explored. In particular, the connections between African Americans that identify themselves as males and their anti-SRO perceptions. Those identify themselves as female and their pro-SRO perceptions. Whites that identify themselves as male and their mixed views and perceptions. And it just would be interesting to just capture the stories, just to kind of see if they have any personal situations which kind of open the door to their perceptions. Another implication is to expand the views across additional school-based mental health staff. The inclusion of school counselors might be beneficial for further studies, as well as other school-based mental health staff. I also foresee a number of limitations, and this is common because there is no research that is void of limitations. No matter how well you draft it, there's always something that you may not be able to catch. The obvious is that we only looked at the Chicagoland area. And this is qualitative research it should not be 100% generalized, but it should still be noted that we only looked at Chicagoland area, as well as there is limited time within the study. I do believe if given a little bit more time, additional groups might have grown an interest in being part of the study. In this study, there was only one non-binary participant and one Hispanic participant. And I believe if given more time, I probably would have had more participants to probably had even more of a maximum variability of perceptions. So those are my main two. There's a few others, but those are like the main two I kind of saw. So what is next? We did the study. What can we do? What is the recommendations? Well, the recommendations of this I kind of gathered from the literature review as well as the data analysis and the discussions. Number one, remove zero tolerance policies. A lot of districts have been moving towards removing zero tolerance policies, but this should definitely be removed across the board. Just allow every child's behavior to be evaluated on its own merit, and then have school administrators to spearhead this than just having blanket policies. Mandatory diversity training is also recommended to help reduce the school to prison pipeline. This is key as it'll be possible for implicit bias to be seen, not just in teachers, but in SROs and also school-based mental health staff. This will be beneficial as it will change the school climate in being more welcoming towards all students, not just those that personify the face of school climate. School administrators should be restored back into their role as disciplinarians, as they are the ones that are trained and they hold the responsibility of managing their schools. A memorandum of understanding should be created in every school district and understood by every school. If a school is to have an SRO, their roles should be listed and staff should be aware of those roles. In most schools, school psychologists we're pretty much seen as educational test administrators. And school social workers are kind of seen as small group therapists. Both groups are trained in working with the largest student body if we have time and allowed to do so. Research shown that SROs are being used as counselors as we speak. However, school psychologists and school social workers are actually trained to counsel kids. So it is recommended for schools to just give them allocated time just to work with the greater student body. And that's including teachers and support staff. And this will help in addressing the social emotional needs of children. And the second point, utilizing restorative practices and positive behavior interventions, that should be used as well across the school, not just in a few classrooms, but across schools, in fact, across districts. And last, all staff and students should be known as peacemakers, not just school resource officers, not just psychologists, social workers, but every staff member and every person should be seen as peacemakers. And so I thank you all for your time in attending my dissertation defense. I'm open in welcoming any questions about the study or in elaborating on any of the previous points shared. I apologize, I kind of went kind of quick. But
you did a fabulous job, Brian. I want to thank you for your excellent presentation, and I'm going to ask your committee members to, if they have any questions or any comments, any clarification. Why don't we can start with Dr. Crabtree. Do you have any questions or comments or suggestions?
Just a comment or two, maybe. To start with, I just want to say you did a fabulous job. You really did. We communicated a little bit about your research and your findings, and I talked to you about the idea that there were things in there in your research and your findings that kind of stood out to me, and we had a nice email conversation about that, and you really, really did a good job of pulling those things out. The idea that you didn't start out to find that perhaps gender and race played a played a role in the way that people's perceptions of SROs played out, but it definitely did show up in your research. And that certainly wasn't something that you expected and not necessarily something that you maybe you noticed it or not, but didn't use in your writing initially. And yet I picked it up right away. And so you did a really nice job of demonstrating that. And that chart that you used here in this presentation was really, really well done. It just, boy, it just jumps right out at you. You know, you can really see that. So that was a really nice way to show that in this format. So you did a nice job with that. I think that there's a lot of future research that can be done. I think this is just like the tiny little tip of the iceberg. I'm going to say there's so much more research that can be done in terms of police in our schools, and how or if they can be used effectively. I think this really touches on the fact that there's some research out there, but what you found doesn't correlate with that research. So that
Yes.
definitely lets us know that we need to do some more work in education to figure out what works. And I think this is, to some extent, it's kind of groundbreaking, because what you found was not what you expected. And you said that several times. I didn't expect this. This surprised me.
Definitely.
And that's good. That's good, because that's what research does a lot of times. Is it doesn't just confirm what you already know. It tells you what you didn't know and allows us to learn new things. And that is what I found to be really refreshing and really well done about your research, Brian, is the fact that you went there and you found new things, and you were not afraid to let us know that. And your writing was so well done in exposing those things. I just wanted to tell you that you did a really good job, and your methodology was fantastic. And you made my job easy.
Thank you so very much. And I also want to thank I know I don't have any of the participants with me, but I was amazed at how open the participants were, and that they just was completely honest in the interviews. Some points extremely honest in the interviews.
Well, you could tell that you know that they don't get asked.
Yes.
And that's one thing that I find a lot of time. Teachers, school staff, the people who work directly with the kids, we are rarely asked. You know, that no one asks us, and I say us because I'm a teacher too, but no one asks us what we think or what we know. People just make policies and tell us we have to follow them, and they often don't make sense. And it's a frustrating thing. So when someone asks a person like that, a school social worker, a school counselor, a teacher, whatever, hey, tell me about this thing, they'll talk.
Yes. Yes,
It's
that
a
is
wonderful
true.
opportunity to share, you know, their experience and their knowledge. So yeah, they get a real opportunity from that, and it's a wonderful thing for them too. So yeah, that's great.
Thank you so very much, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Crabtree. Dr. Bonner, do you have any comments, questions, suggestions?
A lot of my ideas were stolen there. Yeah. I mean, I agree with all of that. I think of, and I, like I said, so many things have gone through my head. I hope, Brian, that you continue this research yourself, because I think that, and even articles or even a book, something entitled, is school going to turn into a jail? I mean, that kind of thing, I mean, it's what I think of immediately. I remember as a person working with school counselors going into a school, and it doesn't make any difference. It was in Chicago, and they locked me in the classroom. And I'm thinking, okay, why are you locking me? They go, you're safer if we lock you in the room than if we don't. It's like, okay, so what's out there that's going to bother me, and nobody bothered me, etc. But I mean, do we believe that we need police in all our schools, and that's going to solve it? Your statement about, what happened to the school administration as disciplinarians, did they give that up? It's too hard, they don't want to deal with it. I mean, that's their job. I'm sure it's in their job description. So And this,
And it
you know,
is.
yeah,
It
that's
is.
what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking, you know, and then also, you know, the idea of this pipeline thing. I mean, are people getting that piece? You know, so we are becoming more racist than we were before just by this whole process, you know, so, I mean, each time I look at your stuff, I get wound up, you know, and that's a good thing, right? Because it's like, to me, it's like, somebody's got to stop this. And I don't mean that necessarily those people have got to go out of here, but they got to have a whole different attitude if they're going to be doing this, right? You know, as a
Yes.
student, like you say, you know, some of the students are fearful of being in school with these people here, and they're not doing anything, right? So we're assuming that the kids are all bad. We're assuming that things are going to happen, and we're assuming we're going to need this. So are they going to be permanently in our schools? And you go back in history, right? They've been around, right? So has this made things better? Not so much, right? So are they doing a great job? You know, I mean, we could do a study with that too, you know, like, so
That's true.
have they changed things so much that we don't need them anymore? Well, obviously, a lot of people don't feel that way. So, you know, that's another angle to look at this, right? So, yeah, they've been around for how many, you know, 10s, 20, 30 years? Not so much, you know, so yeah, you get me going. So you don't want to because it's you know, and that's why I liked you did the study, and it's just like we got to continue with this because
Yes.
it's wrong as the way it is, you know. Police officers, you know, I mean, when I was in high school, we had police officers in high school, but not all the time. But you know, but you know, and we didn't have guns and we didn't have knives, etc. We just had fists, you know. But you know, it wasn't there all the time. It was maybe activities, blah blah blah, you know, and it was to scare kids, right? But this thing, you know, this, you know, arresting, you know, and I mean, a kid does something. And again, anyway, you know, prejudices and all this kind of stuff, you know, you do one little thing and now you're going to go to jail. Well, let's go over this, you know, why you and why not you and kind of thing, you know, and who's going to, it seems like the administration kind of like, yeah, fine. You know, let's just kind of go kind of like not watching, you know, just let these people take care of it because the Chicago police know how to handle this. Right. So again, don't get me going. You know, I had coffee this morning and I can get real going, but I really, really got into your research a lot. And I hope that, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be you, but you're into it, right? So,
Oh, yes.
I mean, and you got another life, obviously, maybe many lives, you know, but, you know, as far as your job, your family, et cetera, but somebody's got to continue this because it's important. And, you know, to be able to bring it up to those people like, hey, are you looking at this? Or administration is just happy, they don't have to deal with this, you know, that kind of thing. People go into prison. Well, we actually assume that certain races go to prison. So, hey, you know, I mean, I'm being sarcastic, right? So we can't go there, right? So how are we going to change this? And I apologize because I had 2 cups of coffee this morning. So
that's how I feel too.
yeah. And I mean, it's a serious thing in our school system. If we believe that every school needs police officers. And I did a lot of work in Austin, Texas, and you know, the you know, all the, you know, killings and stuff like that. So is that going to help this? I mean, people don't even want to send their kids to school, you know, and this is elementary school. But is this going to help this, you know, and what do these police officers see and what's their rules and, you know, what's this, you know, it's like, I mean, we can get real scared and we can, you know, anybody make a move, we're going to arrest them, right? You know, are we teachers? Are they going to get an education, or is this going to be like I said, a jail where you go to school? You know. Anyway, I'm stopping now. But I obviously, can you tell I liked your research? You know, I found it very interesting. I've read it several times, and I get worked up each time I read it, which is good because sometimes you read people's things, and this is no offense to other people, but going and I'm going, yeah, you know, like yeah. So I wish that you will continue it because I think it's a real important topic. Or either get other colleagues to continue with it, or people who see it like you. And I'm thinking even national. I mean, Chicago's a good place, yeah. But I mean, yeah, but I mean, even nationally, because I don't think it's just Chicago, you know.
That is true.
And it'd be interesting to see if small towns have anything going. You know, I mean, maybe they don't have SR, but maybe who knows? You know what I mean? Small towns have got kids that quote act out too. I mean, kids act out everywhere. It's part of being a kid, right? So what do you make a decision who goes to prison or good, not prison, but jail, you know, but I mean, in jail then ends up prison, you know, it's like, and you ask the kid what they did. How'd you get here? Well, you know, they put me there from, my junior year in high school. Well, somehow something went wrong here, kind of a thing. So anyway, I'm stopping. But obviously, I would
Thank you so
love to hear
much.
more research. Yeah. And I think that, like I said, a book, because it needs to be, again, a lot of people, SRO, what the heck is that? Nobody, unless you're in the system, like you're in the system, they don't know that's going on. People
That's
out in the
true.
suburbs, they have no idea. Yeah, kids are bad. We read in the paper, oh my gosh, it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, they need officers. Those kids in the city are bad. How do we get a perspective here? So you need to write.
Mhm.
So if you had
I
enough
will definitely.
plans, you need to keep writing. So yeah, because you write well as well. So
Thank you.
yeah, but you got to keep doing it. Don't stop now. This is not the end. Today maybe it's the end, but start up again tomorrow. So
Okay.
anyway.
Well,
Okay, I'm
thank you both. It's kind of what you said, and it's, you guys kind of stole my thunder there a little bit with your comments. I too, it was just fascinating. It also kind of angered me and got me going on so many different ways. I thought that, what we shared and what you shared, Brian, I was fascinated that that there was really no true consensus between your school psychologists and social workers, and actually even polarized. So, and then I thought your suggestions for future grouping was also just, whoa, that was, yes, that would be very interesting. And then one of the things that that you hit a little bit on was, the perception that it may not be, in fact, due to the school shootings and due to drug thing, but it's a perception of the climate. So there's so many different things that you can go further in, which my colleagues had recommended to continue doing research on this. What I do see, and both Dr. Crabtree and Dr. Brunner has alluded to it, we need to write for journals or whatever. I know the three of us can help you, and I can, obviously not tonight, obviously not this weekend.
Yeah, not tonight.
But moving forward, I do have quite a few journals, I can say, that would be interested in this, because
That'd be fantastic.
yes, the reason why you began your research was because there was a void with school-based mental health. So this is what, my colleagues have said, this will contribute to literature and to the future research. So I will gather some of that together for you over the weekend, and then maybe next week, maybe the week after, I'll reach out to you, because this is really good stuff, Brian.
Awesome. I am in favor.
Yes, good.
Before we go on, can I add one more thing?
Please.
And I'm real strong on this, and I, as we're all scholars, right? Journals and things like that. But I think there needs to be something written for the guy on the street, who doesn't see this, who doesn't go into journals, who doesn't do the research, to get involved. Communities get information about this, etc. And that's no disrespect to anybody going into a journal, but who goes into journals? Us, right? Not too many other people go into journals. And a journal is a great place, because that's going to get the scholars going, right? But I think that just the, people who don't understand this, or people who have no idea, how do you reach those people? And both the journals and some other way to go into communities and say, look, this is what's going on. You decide, let's talk, kind of a thing, so that there's going to be a movement, and again, so I'm not against the research. I'm not, journals is a wonderful place, but how do you get a movement going? Don't I sound like a radical? But how do you get the movement going to be able to, make this change or whatever needs to be done? Either these people who are the officers need to tone it down a bit, and maybe they can still be there, but I think that people need to know, like, obviously people in the Chicago system know. I live in a suburb real close to Chicago. We don't have that. So that's why your search probably got me even more going, but it can happen at any school, right? Any district, any place. So how are you going to get people to start looking at this, and making the change? So I think it needs to be other places as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's interesting. I served as a school board member for 12 years. And I think, to be honest, even some of the school board members don't understand. They're truly in charge of making policy. And yet they don't really even have an understanding of what is the role of an SRO.
Right.
Or, going even further, whichever way you want to look at it. What about like PTAs and PTOs? I mean,
Right.
does the average parent understand what their
Right.
role is or isn't? So that's a great point, not only to put it into our, to look for educational journals and
Right.
such and research, but also to put it in. I know that the PTA and PTOs have, magazines and such that goes
Right.
out. That would be something.
Right.
Or even, like we said, to school board members.
Or even some just general magazines that people are reading, like off, you go in the grocery store and you get a magazine. I mean, one of those places where it's an article from a scholar as yourself, it's going to be doctor. It's not going to be just somebody off the street, right? Who's writing this, but there's going to be somebody who's going to be interested enough in this, especially with what's happening in our world today, right? That's going to be interested in this kind of information. Again, that people, and I keep saying on the street, but you know what I mean, people on the street versus,
Absolutely.
Scholars. But
Like
again,
the Chicago Tribune
yeah,
or the Wall
I-
Street Journal or.
yeah, or something, I mean, and they'd be anxious to have that kind of information. And again, I'm not against journals, I think that's a wonderful place because you want other scholars to get involved in this too. So, but I think that, and like school boards and stuff like that, as you said, I mean, it's like, does everybody know? And it's not a matter of ignorance. It's just like, do you know? You don't know what you don't know until somebody tells you. So.
Right, no. Well, good. This is great conversation. So Paul, without further ado, would you move us